Thanks everybody for joining today. This is Dexter Robinson, VP of Marketing for RTriad Enterprises LLC out of Greensboro, North Carolina. As we all know, there's a lot of things going on in today's world, personally and professionally. And one of the potent conversations that's going on and happening just around the world is the future of work and what does that look like, considering the COVID pandemic, just as well as how technology is changing, continues to be a disruptor. This is an ongoing conversation for all segments and vertical industries. So we wanted to take a little bit of time and just talk about what does that look like from our professional lenses. What does it also look like from a personal standpoint, and how has COVID impacted us in that time as well? Our first topic today will be about the gig economy. So we just want to talk a little bit about, well, what is the gig economy? How is it impacting what's going on in today's time? And we look forward to you all engaging with us in this conversation.
So what I wanted to do was I wrote a white paper a little while back just talking about this. It's not a skills gap, it's a learning gap. So there's a number of factors that weigh into that, and I shared that paper. But to that point, it started me looking at what are other people thinking about the future of work's going to look back like. And so particularly watching how people go through jobs and the expectation of people of having a job for a long period of time, then retiring and working in the same place. That's sort of history, right? And that's obsolete. So then what does work look like now? Well, you got a lot of people moving through jobs. A lot more of them are not having benefits, a lot more are not having a living wage. So, hey, what does that look like, number one? And we know what that looks like. People are suffering, right? So, and then on the third level, okay, well, what's the alternative? And then we start looking at things like the gig economy, where people are earning multiple streams of revenue, doing different times, work when they want to work, use their house for Airbnb, right? All of these other different avenues for generating revenue. So what does the future of work really look like? And so just wanted to lay out in front of people what highly performing Black professionals are doing and seeing and thinking about the future of work. I would love to have had some of the younger people on here too, because we want their perspective, but we'll kick it off and we'll keep mixing it up with different voices throughout the series. So I just was thinking, hey, wouldn't it be great to hear professionals weigh in on what we're seeing, what we're thinking about the future of work, of course, the work we're doing inside of our triad and how that weighs into the future of work, which is, what about apprenticeship? This is not something new, right? This apprenticeship's been around forever. So it's just applying it to a different field. So that's kind of where I want to jump in.
Start off, it was interesting that Kevin, talked about, a gig economy, and myself as somebody who's really had long-term employment, like my view is very different. And what I'm finding now, and, having had conversations with, several of my friends in particular, all of, most, of my group, we can start thinking about retirement. Some of my friends have retired. I was thinking about it, but I was thinking about it in terms of retiring from my current job to do something else, because I like working. I'm not tired of working yet. So what I'm finding in terms of the future of work and what the challenges are, I can take, for example, the kinds of things that I'm doing with our triad, which is, kind of, a different kind of experience for me in that, take a piece of software, take, any, Word or Excel or PowerPoint or, any of those kinds of things. I have always considered myself to be at the high end of proficiency. Now we take that and we go to Teams and we go to SharePoint, and I am totally lost and feeling like a fish out of water and totally incompetent. And it's not a good place for me to be, because, I'm a fast study. I can always consider myself a fast study. Clyde will probably disagree with me because I don't know if he's given up on me yet. But, so the future of work for somebody who's, kind of at the, quite frankly, the top of their career, for what they've been doing, and now having to think about doing something different and feeling like a fish out of water is a little bit unsettling. Do I think I'm up for the challenge? Absolutely, but it's different, very different. So put that out there.
Well, I'll say one thing to kind of add on to what Patricia was saying from this perspective of just the workforce in general. This is the first time in the world's history that you've had 5 generations in the same workforce. So, I think that has a strong impact on the future of work as well, because as you're saying, people are used to working in different ways. The thought process is different. And, growing up, people always talked about, oh, I'm part of this generation, I'm part of that generation. But this is the first time that you're really actually seeing those characteristics have an influence in the workplace, and a strong influence at that, because there are so many different folks in the same space. So I would be delighted to hear some of your perspectives about how that's also kind of influencing how people are working together and what the future of work looks like.
I think you make a wonderful point with 5 generations being together in the workforce at the same time. One big thing, and I think this is true for all generations, at some point you get bored. At some point the drive and the excitement goes away, and you get to a kind of a humdrum place. Right.
Yeah.
This way, in the gig economy, if you have choices, you can do something different. You can work a few hours on this contract and, do a little of this, because so many of us have so many different skills that a lot of times when we go in a particular position, we got to put half our skills up on the shelf and just do this one. Right. So this way you get to experience your whole self. So you'll be doing a little of this, that starts to get a little humdrum, you move to that. So, it keeps the morale up, it keeps the drive, it keeps the adrenaline up. Oh, something new, something exciting, another challenge. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think it's awesome. And the technology is in place to support it. That's not an excuse anymore, right? So, look at us. Look what we're doing in the face of this crisis that we're in. We haven't skipped a beat. We're communicating and, we're making stuff happen, doing things. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. I guess I'll just build to kind of what Ryan was saying, and Dexter, kind of to your comment. When I look at the workforce today and I think about it from a millennial perspective coming into the workforce, right? They think different, they act different. They're looking at, do I really need to go to college? Just in time learning, and they're the type that really is embracing the gig economy as far as, I want to do a piece of work, right, for a period of time, short period of time, project type time frame, and then I want to take some time off and enjoy life, right? When I look at the millennials, that's kind of what you're seeing with them. And then when you look at, kind of, Ron, to your point, the technology now that's being introduced, that we're leveraging, is actually making it easy for that to happen, right? And then when I think about it from an employer's perspective, some of the things that they're looking at is, I want the best skill set, and that skill set may not necessarily be in my area. It could be on the other side of the U.S. or on the other side of the country or the world, right? So technology is enabling that. So when if I'm thinking from an employer's perspective, I want to get the best resource that I can, and they may not necessarily live in my arena, my area. So I think that's driving the gig economy.
Yeah, I think that opens up, just to add to what you're saying, it just brought this thought to mind. One of my aspirations when I grow up is going to be, and it's prime, it's perfect, is to be a digital nomad. Now, a lot of people don't know what that means, right? And it's a beautiful thing. It's growing leaps and bounds. There's hundreds, maybe thousands, there's thousands of people doing it now, where you give up your house, you give up, all your belongings that keep you in one place. You generally live out of a suitcase, but you live all over the world. You go here and you work remotely for 6 months on the beach. You go there, you see the whole world, and you're changing gigs, you're getting this contract, you're doing that contract, you're in Australia, and You know, that's a beautiful thing, and it's all doable.
I think more important to that scenario is you get a tremendously different perspective. And I think a lot of people, especially when we talk about younger folks, I know a number of them that they'll fly to another country and call their friends when they land. Hey, who can I crash with? I mean, that would never have occurred to me, right?
That's
but
correct.
They're living that lifestyle because it's available, and it creates different perspectives that I think are more useful in the sense of what is the possible. Like they don't see the same barriers that maybe we're seeing in some of the more traditional workforce environments. And therefore, like you say, Ron, if I could turn up work wherever I'm at, and I think the technology has definitely, particularly for executive level folks, turned up their lifestyle is a lot more amenable than having to be in the office and lose your family. You can be with your family, you take a 5-minute call, and then you can jump right back in, right? So, but you're not losing your vacation or what have you. So vacation has been a topic of mine recently because nobody believes I ever take vacation, but I do. And that again is a part of the future of work, is that doesn't have to look like traditional ways of doing those things.
Right. I mean that's awesome with the digital nomad thing, especially for the millennials, and let's just take, for example, somebody that's single, they, like you said, they can just drop in another country and say, who could I crash with? There's lots of infrastructure in place. There's websites, there's sharing sites, collaboration sites that allow people to say, get some room and board when they go to a particular place. You can, kind of offer to help with this person's, say, farm and crash there,
Right.
what I mean, while you're in that country,
Yes.
or whatever they do. You know what I mean? The hostels and house sharing and, Airbnb kind of things, and whatever they might call it overseas. And, so you can really subsist and be happy.
To that point, earn in those different environments digitally.
Yeah.
Have different revenue streams.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Kevin, just maybe just following up what you said a moment ago, work-life balance and being able to take that vacation. I think what a lot of people have recognized probably over the past 2 months with COVID, right, is, how can I now balance work-life balance? And they're doing that, right? So they're being able to work from home and actually manage family life, right? So it brings its pros and cons, but they are seeing that there is a balance there, right? I know for me, when I was on your traditional corporate, job, I worked around the clock, right? So I had a challenge with, adjusting to work-life balance because, one, I love what I do, and secondly, the demand for the work required a lot of my time when you're in the IT field, which I've been in for 25 years. So, I think, what a lot of families are finding who are not traditionally in the IT field, but just dealing with technology, is they're working from home now, managing family and work. So I think there are some benefits there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the gig economy. That's what we call it, right? The gig economy, and, put some of those ingredients together. You got multiple generations, right? Working together, working collaboratively, in different locations, different continents, right? Different parts of the world. It's pretty awesome. And it's seamless to the customer, seamless to the client in most cases. That's the beauty.
I'm going to say something to that, Ron, because one of the things that, I'm seeing with the 5 generations at work is the clash of generations because of perspectives. The language is different. How we talk to each other is different. How we go to work is different. How we dress for work is different. So from an employer's perspective, employers, generally speaking, need to incorporate, need to rethink some of those work roles. For one, who says, you need to wear a tie? Who says, that doesn't need to be, in our roles. And be flexible about how people need to work to that point. I just wrote for RTriad a telework policy. And as I was going through it, I'm like, this is different because it's very likely we'll have more people who are choosing to telework for balance issues than we thought possible before. A lot of companies are reducing their footprints as far as brick and mortar is concerned because they see that remote work does work in a lot of cases. And why do we have to be in a building anyway? So there are those kinds of changes that that we see happening now. That I'm certain will continue as we go forward in terms of what work looks like. But going back to what Ron was saying, it can be a beautiful thing if people are of the mindset of learning from each other, because I certainly know that there's a lot that I have to learn from millennials and the Gen Zers and the Gen Xers, being a, here I go, baby boomer. Kevin, don't act like you don't know. But actually, you're not technically a baby boomer, even though for the time being we're the same age. Anyway,
I think that you make a great point. I think that that could be an issue. The different languages, the different morals, the different levels of maturity. I definitely think that could be an issue. But then again, I think that we could make it meld and we could make it work. You know what I mean? As the millennials start to see that, they could get some level of wisdom and maturity from us, and we see that we can get some level of energy from them and maybe ideas and, those kind of things that they have a lot of, where we can sit back and we got the wisdom of time that, anything. I tell people, anything that, you're going through, I've probably been through at least 10 times, so, you know what I mean? We have that and we can sit back and we can, offer the advice, etc. But then again, feed off of their energy, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
actually,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
A good portion of what we're doing here at RTriad came from the fact that when I was with Microsoft, I spent a good deal of time with the college hires. And a lot of people really didn't like that onslaught. They did a lot of hiring of college hires, and it wasn't well received by the folks that had been there for a while because they felt like they're hiring people at a much lower income rate to replace us, right? And there's always that rub going to multi-generational workforce issues, right? But to the future of work, like Ron is saying, I found and embraced them and found their innovation and their new energy and their eagerness to learn as a refreshing piece, and was inspired to reinvent myself each year or every other year and really get engaged at a different level. Helping them excel at their careers was helpful for me to really feel like a value component in that chain, right? So I could come in there and do a lot of that stuff. In my sleep. But to that point, why would I, when I could help somebody else learn to get to that level and have 10 people that can then go do that, which I think is a greater value proposition, right? And that's really what we're working on here. We're working on network learning. We're working on making sure we replicate the sage wisdom that Ron's talking about, right? What would it look like if there were 10 Rons rather than one Ron? Probably not going to happen, but I seen a picture once that had about 7 of them in there. So it's possible, right? And the thing is, when we start to scale, and I'll tell you, my tenure at Microsoft really made me very focused on scaling. We've got some big problems to solve. We've got unemployment at a rate that's ridiculous. We've got people that are looking to get into high earning careers, and we've got all of this open skills gap, they're calling it, in cybersecurity. Why? Right? Really, there are still people out here that can learn. And if they can learn, they can fill that gap. It's not a skills gap, but they need
absolutely.
They need to have people that are committed to working through it with them through mentorship, through training, through, building some of the softer skills that we're all very familiar with, and learning, like you say, the protocol to work in this new environment that none of us have ever, right? The world's never seen it before. So here it is. It's an opportunity.
So one of the things that, being the youngest person on the call, no offense, but one of the things that I think would be important for those who are watching and kind of joining us on this call today, one of the things I think is important from a younger person's perspective is to understand the value that they bring to the table, right? So Kevin, you made a great spiel about how you bring value to them and kind of help them propel them in their professional career. But one of the things that I would pose to you all is, how have these younger folks assisted you all and brought value to the table? Because I think in a lot of conversations that I have with my peers and folks who are younger and entry-level positions, they don't understand their skill set or strength, right, just yet. So talk about how invaluable some of their strengths are to this gig economy, but also just the workforce in general.
You want me to start?
Oh, well, you talked last, so let's go somebody else first, and then
okay.
We'll get back to you.
I'll come back to you. Okay.
I'll go if you like. It's definitely a good point. Now, in my own personal experience, well, I got a couple of things to say here real quick. So, so going back to Kevin's point, I'll come back to yours, but going back to Kevin's point, with the all the jobs available in cybersecurity. Now, it just doesn't get any better, so to speak. You have all of these dislocated people, millions, right, around the country because of COVID and so forth, no job, so they need to reskill soon so that they can put food on the table. And now you have the cybersecurity field that's crying for people with 3.5 million jobs available, right? Now, what's the gap there? What's the delta? The delta is to get trained. You're out of work, training stands in between landing those jobs in that field that's wide open. And the pay's good, It's a skill and it's very learnable. It's achievable. I talked to somebody the other night and say, I've been wanting to get into cybersecurity, but I think that there's a lot of math involved. Really? So you got some of the misconceptions, right? That's not even the case. But also now to your point is what I've drawn from the younger crowd. They have that energy, as we've said several times, and that drive. Now, all our career, we've had that energy and drive and that competitive spirit. That's kind of how we got where we are today. But of course, it's kind of waning, because our responsibilities are more and, we're more focused and this and that. So, but when you see that competitive spirit around you and you start feeling that energy, it makes you remember, and you see that, they have all that energy, but it's kind of like unharnessed. Sometimes it's all over the place, and they need some guidance. Although you gotta get around that ego sometimes to give the guidance, but it's like that unbridled energy that you need to get in there, and you need to give it some focus and some guidance. Okay, so
I guess I'll weigh in my perspective. I'm probably the next youngest on the call, so maybe I'll shed a little light.
Rubbing it in.
On the perspective, I'm not as young as I used to, but I think I still can relate. I have a son who's 20, but I think the one thing that I see unique with the millennial crowd, the younger crowd, is they have this unbelievable network, a way of networking, right? And with that, it's a communication that happens, and it happens very rapidly. So, for example, new technology, new ways of doing things, it happens and it goes amongst their network very quickly, right? I don't network that quick, right? My son, they can get a message out, whether it be Snapchat, whatever the case may be, but they're getting those messages, those meanings, those current events, whatever's going on, they're able to disseminate that information very quickly. So I think that leans very closely to what's going on with the gig economy, because it is changing rapidly. And for them to be able to communicate in such a way that they can actually harness, I think to your point, Ron, they're eager to learn, right? I think it's unharnessed, but yeah, they have this energy that they bring to the table, right? And if you can get them focused, right, they're going to soak that up. They're like sponges. All the millennials I work with, it's like sponges. So they're able to rapidly digest that information and spit it back out. So I think for me, that's what I see when it comes to our millennials, is their ability to have that network and get that communication out, and very eager to learn.
Quick question: are we talking actual millennials, which includes me and Dexter, or are we talking the generation behind us, which is I think Jordan? I think Jordan's in that generation.
Yeah,
is in the next generation. So, Brandon, you bring up a great point. I was actually going to share.
What I mean, and so is Dex.
Right.
Dex is much more millennial than I am. I'm Gen X. I don't use social media like Dex, and even a lot of my wealth building and everything has been very traditional. So yeah, to me, like I view Jordan, his generation, as like a whole different world. As far as, if they're going to be the primary target, and I think Clyde mentioned his son being 20, I've had folks on my team that, were fresh out of school, 22, 23, and, they don't send emails,
Exactly.
They think texting their boss is like official communication.
Yeah.
I'm a millennial, but even I'm like, hold on now, because I went to the workplace before the boomers started exiting. I was like, you can't text me.
I'm still here, Brandon. I'm still here.
And 5 emojis and expect me to translate that you're going to be late to work today because your stomach hurts.
Ron, that's what I was talking about, that different way of communicating. It's different. And also that sense of entitlement that some of the Gen Zers come to work with. I come in and why am I not like in management when I graduate? I graduated last week. Come on now.
But I go back to Brandon, what you said. The question is that wrong, right? If they send 5 emojis to say this is what's going on, is that wrong, right? Because this is the shift that we're being a part of, right? And how do we harness that?
It's different.
Yes.
And
now one thing,
as somebody that's been higher up, my worry is like, with me, it's like, okay, no big deal. But, given the levels that I've been, you're 1 or 2 levels removed from the CEO, or you're dealing with an external client, that's the stuff that keep you up at night. It's like, well, hold on, how are they going to send this communication out to those people? Versus, me having to adapt and understand, okay, Mark, and literally his name is Mark. Mark's 22 years old. Like, he looks at email the way I look at written letters. That's just the life he grew up in. So,
yeah.
One thing I think we have to keep in mind is that, and just from personal experience, and you might share the same sentiment, the sense of entitlement drives me crazy, It just drives me crazy because, you have to work for what you want, and there's amount of time and steps and whatever that, it's just not overnight satisfaction. But at the same time, we kind of, if you look at it in a broad sense, our generation kind of made them like that.
It was their experience for sure. It's their experience.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
We made them like that. So, you got to find a happy medium. Actually, it's a opportunity to train. It's an opportunity to help them relearn that, hey, it has to be a certain amount of sacrifice. Yeah. And no, you can't be CEO tomorrow. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, you can, but it's going to be painful.
Real painful. Yeah. And you might last all of 24 hours.
Right.
The entitlement piece, as long as the aggression and the work ethic are balanced with the entitlement, that's been easy for me to deal with. Mm-hmm. Now, if the entitlement is, way outweighing your work ethic and your aggression as far as like, I really want this, then that's when there's some schisms. And with the younger part of the millennials and the next generation, which I'm not part of, I typically don't have a lot that well, they don't work for me long, to where there's that stark imbalance between their sense of entitlement and then their aggression and the work ethic. So as long as, they're all somewhat balanced, I can deal with it. And maybe that's because I've been very aggressive. I think I was one of the first job hoppers and stuff like that. I don't believe in waiting. So I guess, for me, that's like, I don't have a problem with that. As long as you're willing, to bust it out, hey, I can deal with you wanting it now.
Yep. And I see,
go ahead.
I think a lot of what I've kind of seen, kind of like Brandon, kind of being in the middle of some generations there, right? Is the tradition involved with it, right? So a lot of, and like Brandon said, we're kind of in the middle. There's a lot of folks who are older than us who, they're still on the pension plan mentality, if you will, yes. Right? It's like, hey, you put in your time and then you make your way to the top. And then we've got some folks that are younger than us and saying, no, yeah, you can put in your time. And I understand there's learned experiences and value that comes with that, right? But my value here is more than, I can contribute more than you do, right? So then you can't be CEO tomorrow. The question becomes with our younger generation, well, why not? What's holding me back? And the problem is the only answer that you're getting back is time. And to a certain extent, we've got to figure out, how do you have that conversation with someone so it's not so, like, I guess condescending in a way, right? So yeah, we know that with time you have more experiences and that brings more value to be able to have that next skill set. But when you see people ahead of you that don't bring the same kind of value or don't have the same level of knowledge, right? You begin to question, well, what is it that you do bring to the table other than you've been here for 5 to 7, 10, 20 years, right? And I mean, to be honest with you, that's why I left my last job and told the big boss, I said, I know my worth is more than you can ever pay me. So I'm choosing to stay here because I love what I do, but do know that I contribute to this organization 10 times more than you. Like, that's just the way that it is. So there's some balance there, Yeah, we gotta get some balance there.
I'd like to get back to your original question, right? And what could we tell this younger generation? So I'm going to start with you because I think sometimes, and this has just been my experience, and as I've gone up higher levels in the organization, I've experienced this. We think about competency as being the key thing, especially when we're younger. But there's more than just competency, right? There's also fit in the organization. There's also relationships. So, especially when you're talking at the executive level, a lot of the reason that those people are in place is because they have relationships and they continue to form relationships in a different way than, the frontline worker. So that takes some time. And that goes to the last piece of what I wanted to say about what could they use or what things do they need to tap into. And that's the transferable skill sets, right? That is how you form relationships, your communication skills, your ability to, shine in a room without outshining everybody to where they all feel ashamed to be in the same room, right? The need not to have to be the smartest person in the room, things like that, right? Those are skills, and they're softer skills, but they're also transferable. They go with you in different industries. They go with you in different roles, and so starting to tune in on those transferable skills, how to negotiate. Right. I mean, things like that. Those are things that aren't obvious to everybody, especially when you're competing at the competency level. But like I told a lot of the folks that I mentored, I said, look, the next job you go to, everybody that's going for this role is equipped. They're all competent. Any one of them can have the job. So what's the differentiator that's going to get you this job?
Yeah. So I just want to, Dexter, hit on something you said and kind of speaking also to what Kevin was just talking about. So I have a 20-year-old son and I got to have that conversation. Dad, why can't I come out being the CEO of a company, right? And I want to throw this out here because I want to shake up the conversation a bit, because we're talking about time and experience and skill set.
is that really what we're talking about, right? Because when I start looking at the owners of Facebook, right, these are guys who are, young, in their 20s, and they're CEOs, and they're running multi-million-dollar corporations. So I want to make sure we don't get it down this pigeonhole and say, I got to have all these skill sets, but I'm looking at what value do you bring to the company, right? What influence do you have? Are people willing to follow you down this path, right? That's what I think we're saying is really needed. It's not time. It's not, I've done this, that, or whatever. How do you bring value to this company, and how do you influence people, right?
Yeah. Right. And your ability to make decisions and stand on them. And you touched on something that has been a struggle for me as I deal with, essentially my exit from corporate America at 36. Well, I was 35 and 30. I just turned 36, and dealing with the younger generation, especially the minorities, that I have, mentored and brought in behind me. It's difficult to have that conversation because, like Dex telling his boss, and I've done stuff like that numerous times. Hey, I'm more talented than you. I've been more talented than you, and here's the receipts that I produced that are more than you, which is what I did in my last situation before I exited. It's a generational difference in a lot of ways. And then so when you're telling these, the what are they, Gen Z? I think that's the correct name for them. These Gen Z folks, like I had a Gen Zer on my team, smart, young sister, went to Cal Berkeley. I hired her. She graduated Cal Berkeley, double major engineering and something like 21. She gets in a room and she's like, all these people that are your peer level and above, most of them are stupid. And I'm just like, yeah. Well, she's like, well, how do I get past them right now? Because I know I'm not stupid. I'm like, you're not. That's why I asked. But that desire to do it, and like that confidence aspect that goes with that aggression, they grew up, you could say different stuff. Me and Dex are the last generation of the kids that were told, be seen and not heard. Like, I ain't told my kids that. These Gen Z people ain't heard that. You're not exactly. So it's a different mindset when they get in the workplace and they have learned to evaluate things different. And you're like, well, hold on. There's a schism between my talent and my output and my potential with the people above me. And they don't hold their mouth. And I don't, but they're on a whole nother level. And so it was like, how do we go about training that to what it is? To me, I think the gig economy is a perfect transition to what ownership is, and really focused on what Kevin's always talking about is understanding your value, how to create income from it. And then you've been able to truly ascertain of yourself, hey, am I a corporate America person? Which means, am I gonna play the game? Am I gonna, deal with the fact that there's a hierarchy and there's relationships and I'm not going to have a natural fit? Am I going to go find a mentor and a sponsor and kiss butt and wait turn? Or am I going to go out here and start something on my own? Or do I want to basically do what I've done and it's paid off well? I'm a hired gun. I jump from job to job. I know I'm in the top 3% of what I do. You ain't got to like me. I'm going to solve a problem that somebody else couldn't do. And I got about 18 months of us being able to get along. Like, you got to be able to understand kind of where you are in that mix. And to me, the gig economy, especially as it becomes more white collar, what I want RTriad to help do is to help people figure out kind of where you fit in. Not necessarily, hey, this is right or wrong, has to be this path, but be honest with yourself. Yourself. Am I the type of person that's going to rise up to be an EVP at a major corporation and all the stuff that involves that has nothing to do with skill set and talent? Am I the type of person that's willing to take the risk and get the capital to run my own thing? Or am I the type of person that's kind of in the middle, like I think I've kind of been? I'm super skilled. I'm going to bounce around. I'm going to solve problems, move it on. I think that has to be a part of that thinking of, how we're going to help the next generation, or actually all generations, because this is not just, for the younger people, it's impacting everybody. And COVID is going to only speed it up from an automation standpoint. So where do you fit in? and accepting that, and then, hey, whatever one you are, we should have systems in place. I see Patricia's on the phone. We got the systems in place and the policies to help you, and the program to help you say, yep, you kind of fit in this bucket. This is how we want to help you be the best you can be in that bucket. This might be more of your lane, great. And then round it out from a soft skills, and maybe more important than anything, an expectation standpoint for those different lanes.
Yeah, I want to add into that. I think the real truth of this is proof, right? If you deserve that, show me the proof. Okay. Sorry, I didn't know.
No, but it's like, I go back to Clyde's point. What was Zuckerberg's proof? What was his proof that he deserved his initial, I think it was $1.5 million in seed funding for Facebook?
He had the relationships to get the $1.5 million seed money for Facebook. That's the proof.
He had a relationship. He didn't know them people. He fit a typecast.
Right.
Profile
I'm just saying.
Of Bill Gates, of a Harvard dropout from wealthy parents.
That's all right. Hey, he knows where he fits in, and that's the key, right? That's reality. We got to operate in our own reality and optimize our performance inside of that reality. And that's really where I think the gig economy levels the playing field, because like you say, I can be a hired gun. I don't have to show up in your office. You don't have to know what I look like, what I wear. I solved this problem, and that is enough for you. And just send me the check, please. That's all I want.
Please be sure to visit our website, rtriad.com/no1, to join in on our weekly calls and conversations regarding technical careers, DevOps, and cybersecurity. We would love to have you join in, and we would love to have you participate with the experts and professionals that we bring in the discussion every week. See you there.
It's two things that I said that I think there's a mentoring piece, and maybe we can pick this back up. But there's you think about leadership, right? Leadership is sometimes it's just an internal, natural ability for someone, right? From a leadership perspective, right? True. And then there's this certain influence that you have over people, right? Some people don't have no mentor, no nothing, but they walk in the room and they have influence over people, right? And then there's another level of what value do you bring to the table? It could be an idea, it could be your skill set, technology, whatever the case may be, that tips the pendulum a bit to say, I'm going to follow this guy. And he has something great. I'm going to invest in his idea. I'm going to invest in his vision, right? And now, not to say that you are a good CEO or a leader, but it puts you in that position. And you don't have to have anything but that.
See, but the younger guys, to your point, they could be that natural leader, or they could have that influence or that strong personality, but a lot of times they don't realize it and know how to harness it. That's where the mentor comes in. That's kind of what I'm saying.
I think about Mark Zuckerberg, right? He's probably, the textbook model, right?
But everybody's doing everything for him.
Hey, that's the point I'm making. Think about leadership. Leadership, I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. I want a team of people that can get it done.
When Kevin was talking about, prove it. And leadership doesn't happen without followership.
Exactly. But I think leadership and management is different too. Leadership and management is different. Meaning leadership is people want to follow you. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Followership. You can't be a leader without a following.
One of the things that he was saying about those young folks, right, that I would like to tie into some of the things that you say, right? We can't be afraid of failure. We can't be afraid to fail fast, right? And that's what we're seeing in these young folks is that, when they're having those controversial conversations about, well, why you instead of me currently, right? When I see what you bring to the table and you can't tell me what you bring to the table, right? That's the first piece, right? But I think the second piece is the soft skills that you mentioned in your comment are more about access, right? And less about ability, right? So exposure is the biggest teacher. So if I provide somebody at that entry level the opportunity and expose them to those things, they will build those soft skills. So it comes back to the timepiece. While it's relevant, it's irrelevant, right? Because it really comes down to the access. And we're dealing in a world and a generation to where access is at your fingertips, like Clyde said, right? So if you're not willing to empower me and help me grow, as Brandon said, and kind of create these different styles of buckets to where everybody is just not a number on a tier and trying to make it to the next tier, you're going to have a lot of disruption in the workforce. It's 5 different generations, man. Like, there's no other way to really go at it.
And bringing it back to the organization, though, bringing it back to the organization, that again is where the mentor comes in. The mentor could see that in you, what you don't see in yourself. That's kind of what I'm saying, where they can help guide you because you trust them, And that kind of brings it back to the organization.
I'll go back to the time comment, right? Because let's say a basketball player, Michael Jordan or whatever, right? And although he's a great player, he still takes those 3,000 shots.
I'm still listening.
He still takes those 3,000 shots. That's the process. And that takes time. There's no getting around that. There are certain things when you're developing and cultivating a skill, you have to spend the time.
That's correct.
There's no shortcut to that. I mean, I could want to be a black belt, but I'm not going to be a black belt tomorrow.
And it's what's happening in that time that's important. Opportunities to shadow, for example, or to sit in the room or sit on a Zoom call, whether or not you have anything necessarily to contribute, but to be able to listen and learn. Is as valuable as, kind of being in a role, sometimes more valuable because you have an opportunity, to absorb, what's happening. And sometimes, I've had folks ask me, I always invite people, all of my meetings, management, whatever you call it, all of my meetings, it's like, you want to come on, come to the meeting, because otherwise and one of my, focal points at, my day job is, growing leaders, and that's one of the things that I get, kind of some intrinsic value from. That's personal satisfaction is, seeing and watching, people grow, but they won't grow if they don't have opportunity, right? And if they're not in the space, to Dexter's point, they have to, have that opportunity and access.
I just want to come back to a couple of points that were made. I think that, all of you made valid points, absolutely, about the gig economy and about the different generations and the entitlement and so on and so forth, and trying to be CEO overnight, those kind of things. Again, I think that, the mentoring, having a mentor, having someone that you trust to guide you, without being like directive, to guide you in a way, that's going to help. That's going to help to kind of reshape, to help them relearn or what have you, right? Now, for example, I mean, look at the situation we're in now with, a pandemic, not nationwide, worldwide, right? So if we were already in the gig economy, it would probably be less of a strain because a lot of companies would already be used to just doling out their work to people as needed and so forth, right? Now, in the cybersecurity field, that elevates everything, because now all of these people have to work at home that never worked at home before. All these companies have to entrust them with, their data and so forth at home, where they don't have any security controls. They don't, understand how to shred confidential information or VPNs and whatever, right? So, the gig economy, had it been in place already totally, it would have been almost like, no real interruption. We would have been able to just flow right into that. What do you think?
Are you saying, like, with the gig economy, that it would not have been as disruptive?
Right, it would not have been as disruptive because we would have already been working wherever we are. not in an office. We would already have been, well, let me do 8 hours with this company. Let me do this, side gig with that company. And this company just needs my skill for this or that. We'd have already been in that flow, and we wouldn't have had to, just shut buildings down and send people home. You know what I mean?
Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Two things come to mind about that. One is I question how many businesses are willing to adapt to that change. And then B, I think about how many, like for people that were in a gig economy beforehand, how much of that was really planned versus being a necessity, like doing gigs here and there for different clients, basically freelance as a designer from my personal experience was not my intention coming out of grad school. That was something to do. And it kind of just happened as I was looking at ways on, okay, how do I make money until I find my, my 9 to 5. And the 9 to 5 that I was looking for never came. So then it was like, okay, how do I stay alive? So
I think you're right. I think
necessity in addition to the part-time job I had.
I think that's how the gig economy is coming about based on necessity. I don't think anybody's saying, okay, let's stop everything and work the gig economy. But I'm just saying that, these corporations with these big capital investments in buildings and so forth, that was part of the reason why that wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to send all their workforce home just indiscriminately. They got big bills to pay, for these beautiful buildings and stuff. But now when the pandemic showed up, they didn't have any choice. It was either send them home and let them keep working, or we're going to go out of business. You know what I mean? So I think that now they're being forced to adopt into that, way of thinking, because what if this happens again? We don't want to go out of business. What if this happens again? We need to have the capacity in place to allow them to work at home. That's a big thing, is capacity. Can your network handle everybody logging in from outside? Probably not, if that's what you're prepared for. You know what I mean? Right. Are your people trained? Are the internet service providers in that area, can they take that load? You know what I mean? There's a lot of things involved in that.
That's not just about gig economy. Actually, it's not about gig economy necessarily. It's about, how prepared are folks, for all of those reasons you just stated, Ron, to be able to send their entire workforce home to work remotely. I know, excuse me, my company, we had basically 2 days to get 300 people working remotely, because that wasn't the way that we did business. We did it, but it wasn't without a lot of effort, let's say, because people didn't have the tools, because they weren't used to working that way. Then you had the learning curve because the technology that we were forced to start to use, we hadn't used before, and still experiencing some of that, learning curve. So there's an opportunity, I think, there, because the go forward way of working is not necessarily, going to be, in a building, because it doesn't have to be in a building,
I think that the curve started to turn several years ago after the anthrax scare. You guys remember that? Anthrax. Mm-hmm. I was working for a major financial company doing security assessments on suppliers and third parties. And part of my assessment was asking them, did they have the capacity in place if 40 or 50% of their workforce had to suddenly work from home? Right? Those were the questions I was asking. And all of those other things I mentioned, is the capacity, do they have the equipment? Can do they have the knowledge? Is the internet service providers in that area, are they capable? All of these things. And that was after that anthrax scare, because remember that everybody, no one was going to come to work, with that anthrax thing going on. So it started in a little space. It just never really took off, but COVID changed that, didn't it?
Yeah, I think the thing that I'll add just in reference to that conversation is, when I think about COVID, I think it's, definitely at the C level, there's some different conversations, right, about where are we and where do we need to be. But I think until the data, so you'll start to see data that comes out here before long, right, from organizations about, what was that productivity dip that we took, right? Meaning when we had to go from working completely internal to, opening up our organization and allowing people to work remotely, right? So there was a dip that happened, one, because they had to adjust and turn on a dime, right? But once they made that adjustment, what happened to productivity, right? Did it go up? Did it go down? Did it flatten out? What happened really? Because now I have my work staff working 100% remotely, and now they're dealing with life and delivering on expectations of stakeholders and the company in general. What does productivity look like? Is it more or less? Because now I don't have that commute back and forth to work, right? But the other thing that's happening at the C-level, the CIO is probably the most important guy in the room, is, okay, where are we with security, right? Where are we with, bandwidth and things of that nature? So what are we doing now to harmonize and optimize our new current normal state, right? And what do I want to do next? Do I want to come back in, right? Or do I want to keep it as is and start to improve upon that? That's
and let's not forget these people also had their kids at home. Right. You know what I mean? So it was really that much further away from normal. Not only were they not used to working at home and having that kind of setup, they got their kids to deal with, one to many, Yep. And so, you know what I mean? So I know, right? I can almost assure you that productivity went south.
Well, I mean, there's different things coming out. I mean, people are working more. I don't think that you're going to see a sharp drop in productivity like some people are expecting, based on the fact that people are logging many more hours.
Correct.
But what I think we have highlighted, and I would like us to frame the conversation in that way, and me, I guess my economics background is, Ron is doing a lot of talking about the impact of COVID on the gig economy from a macro level. And Jordan was starting to talk about it from the micro aspect. And I think it would be beneficial for us, for anybody that's going to be taking part in listening to this, watching this, and then as we think about the RTriad business, if we segment this opportunity into the macro and the micro. So from the macro, there's the opportunities around, hey, what can we do to make sure these companies can sustain 40, 50% of their employees working remotely? What does that mean from a security standpoint? How is communication going to happen? And then even from our more experienced leaders in here, you have to totally change how you manage, your team. Managing a team remotely, understanding what people's heads are. Even once the kids do go back to school, that's going to be a very different thing. And for those of us that have had cross-functional leadership roles, being in the room with all those people has been when decisions are really getting made. Because it's like, when I'm in the room with my PM and technical people and stuff like that, I don't know that stuff as well, but I know how to read people's body language to tell me when you're not being totally honest about your deliverable. So, but I can't pick up on all of these things on a Teams meeting. Shout out to Microsoft. So that's from the macro side. The micro side is not just and this is the multi-generational aspect. It's not just the Jordan generation or me and Dexter's generation or anybody else's generation. But it's all of us is, hey, as this gig economy permeates macro across all the industry, and there's no longer I'm a gig worker because I do IT security or I drive for Uber or Lyft or whatever, but every job starts to move towards being a gig worker because automation will allow corporations to cut headcount. How do we help people with that? So to me, it's like I really want us to try to think about this from the two parts, the macro, what this means, and Ron to me is doing a great job of touching on that, but really on the micro also for this company is how can we help those individuals at each generation to prepare for what that new environment is, whether you're fresh out of school, whether you're mid-career, or whether you're 5 to 10 years from retiring, and all these big corporations are like, you know what? I don't really want to pay these people for this experience right now, based on us been able to get along with them not being in the office. So, let me go ahead and those of you that are in the workforce and remember the Jack Welch when he went GE and everybody copied and he cut out all the middle management and the lower upper management. I think you're going to see that happen again. So that also from a macro level comes back to, hey, what can our triad do to help people deal with this seismic shift from the macro and the micro? And I'll be quiet.
One word that I think kind of covers both the macro and micro, and I totally agree with you that we need to look at it at those different levels, right? Because some of the issues are different. But one word that kind of covers it is resilience. Does a company have resilience, and are they prepared? And that's where on the security side, that's where things like business continuity and disaster recovery plans come in place. That's where, having a business impact analysis, knowing what, if this happens, how is it going to affect your bottom line, right? And having those plans in place, which is all based on risk management, but, being able to say, I'm going to move everybody to home. And I'm going to, I got this storehouse, so I'm going to rent all these laptops or whatever it might be that they have to do to prepare to make that quick transition. They just need to have a plan in place, right? And going forward, like I said, it might turn out to stay this way. Companies might wake up and say, oh, this is pretty good. We lost our building anyway, so let them stay at home and, use their electric, right. Instead of ours. So, there's different ways of looking at it, but I agree with you have the micro problems that you have to really look at. And then, of course, like I was saying, some of the overall problems like the capacity and so forth.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn more or get involved into the conversation, please visit our website at rtriad.com/no1 to join our community and network with not only other professionals within your careers, but also with the experts who can then uplift you to achieving the goals you wish to obtain. Thank you for your time, and we hope to see you soon.
Depending on kind of what industry that you're in is also going to be a determining factor in that process, right? So, we've seen a lot of folks in tech continue to thrive, right? Because it's a natural disruptor, right? That's what the industry is. So to be able to pivot at the drop of a dime is thriving and success, right? So we've seen a lot of tech companies been able to do that and pivot, right? So I think the vertical in the industry kind of has a significant piece or play into how some of those things pan out. But back to what Ron was saying as far as the migration path as well, right? So, with every kind of generation, you got to continue to get better, because the whole idea with like business in itself, right? If your business is continuing to do the same every year, so let's say you make $100,000 a year, hey, that's great. But in my mind, as an entrepreneur, if your business isn't having year-over-year growth, you need to sell your business, because it's not scaling. You're not growing. So why do you have it, right? Business is not about sustainability. It's about growth. So, I think it's good that it goes into this gig economy, because it somewhat promotes that, right? To continue to have, that global competitiveness that Clyde had mentioned earlier, and be able to tap in to different folks, because now I'm not tied to a brick and mortar, if you will, right? So there's a lot of different aspects and perspectives that will go into this. And like Ron said, I think COVID forces some of those conversations, and in some cases expedites the process of many of those things, right? They were going to happen at some point anyway for a lot of these different verticals and companies. But I think COVID is helping push many of those things along, and those conversations, forcing them to happen, right? Because, a lot of people like tradition. The issue with tradition, though, is, right, you're never really assessing what's happening. You kind of it's easier for you to overlook some of the things that maybe you need to improve upon, because your overall success hides those things, right? Whereas, this is forcing you to evaluate a lot of things that you may have not evaluated previously. So, and as far as going back to just Clyde and the data, right? There's a lot of data that actually supports working from home, from the efficiency side, that people are more efficient from working from home, right? I think once the data what's that word, disaggregated, we'll be able to kind of look at it and take a deeper dive. So you can look at like what Ron is saying. Hey, what does it look like when COVID first hit and your whole family is home and you're doing everything you would do in one day at home, and those are those increased amount of hours, right? But now that everybody, to a certain extent, has found a rhythm, right? Where does that go? What does that trajectory begin to look like? And I think what people will find is that there'll be stats that continue to prove that work from home is a little bit more efficient. But then the question becomes, from a leadership standpoint, back to why we're having this conversation in the first place. Is a 40-hour work week necessary, right? And that's really what it comes back to, because if I'm banging it out and I'm knocking it out and I'm doing everything that needs to be done and I'm having a 24-hour work week, well, hey, there's more money for me to be had, right? So, there's a lot to this conversation, and I think leadership, those conversations will begin to change, right? Do I really want to hire somebody based off of salary now that I realize it doesn't take 40 hours a week to do what it is I'm asking you to do, right? So that goes right into that gig economy conversation as people like the Brandons and Patricias of the world begin to evaluate that, right? It's going to come to a line item, right? Why am I paying you for 40 hours if you can do it in 24?
Well,
we got to switch some stuff up.
Yeah, exactly. Well, go ahead, Ron. Go ahead. I was going to say, just to build off of that as well, is think about from a community perspective to pollution, traffic, so on and so forth. Are there going to be incentives? Are there going to be incentives for companies to continue to do that, right? So I just want to throw that out there. Sorry.
Another thing I think about, going back to Dexter's comment about like that line item and being able to knock out work that we traditionally thought would take 40 hours. Another thing that I noticed, at least from the graphic design industry, was this talk about value-based pricing. So it's not even so much about trying to price or do anything on an hourly basis. It's really based on value-based. Like, how much is it worth doing this project, period? And then you figure, based off of that, you then adjust your timetables out of that. So that, as we talked about going into the gig economy, that may also be another conversation to look into about value-based pricing and, some of the pros and cons to that. And is it worth switching to that level of pricing when you're dealing with new clients or customers? Actually, also, go ahead.
Continue, please. No, finish your thought.
The other thought, Dexter said something interesting about businesses. It's not really so much about sustainability as much as it's about growth. And I think another thing that we may need, or maybe for me personally, but to define what does that, when we say sustainability, what are we actually talking about? Because I think we had two different definitions in mind. For me, sustainability is more so about what justifies having this business here, period. But it sounds like you were coming at it with a different angle. So I'm personally interested, but I think that may also be something to clear up in future conversations when we talk about business aspects of running yourself as a business owner in the gig economy. I think it's very important to have that right mindset that it is about growth and instead of sustainability.
But that's also going to depend on, kind of the life cycle of your business, because, based on your life cycle, there are periods where you're looking to sustain and not necessarily grow, and that's based on both internal and external factors. So that's a conversation to be had in terms of how your business cycles. So for example, growth, if we were in the opposite unemployment situation, let's say, remember before this COVID thing, we were at near full employment. And one of the things is, how do you grow your business if you can't find the workers? Now, we know cybersecurity, that's a different conversation, but how do you grow your business if you can't find the workers or even folks wanting to do gigs, to grow your business? So is that a life cycle of the business thing? Is that external factors that are impacting whether or not you're in a growth cycle or not? So that's a whole nother conversation about, sustainability versus growth, because I understand Dexter's perspective, but I also understand that that's going to depend on, the nature of your business and the factors, internal and external, that push or pull on whether or not you're in a growth mode or a sustainability mode. So.
Right. So that's a great example of generational difference right there, Jordan, with these 5 generations, right?
Yes.
Because from my perspective, right, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a business leader, as a partner in businesses, right, like I'm not looking for sustainability, right, because that essentially means what I'm trading you is equal value. Like my idea is that I need to get more than what I'm giving. Right. Yeah. So if it's from a sustainability standpoint, I'm looking to sell. I'm looking to come out of that. Right. Like, you know, people who are looking for sustainable stocks, for example. Right. If you know your stock is going to be $50, is worth $50 for the life of the time. Right. Eventually, inflation is going to happen. So you should sell early. Right. And typically people who are looking for that kind of sustainability are on the way out. I'm halfway through my career journey, right? So I'm not really looking for any way to stack my chips, if you will, and just kind of sit on them. Like I need, you know, when you're looking at, you know, people talk about diversifying your portfolio from a monetary standpoint, right? Making sure you have different investments so you continue to grow. That's how I look at business, right? Like I'm just not in that phase in my life. And for many people, like Patricia is saying, there is a very different perspective of what that looks like. So we've got to kind of keep those things in mind from a generational aspect, right? Because the reality is, even for something like RTriad, right? If we're looking to be sustainable, I'm out, right? That's not my gig. That's not my calling. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm looking to grow, I'm looking to scale, and I'm looking to cash out. If you get my drift, you see what I'm saying?
You know, based on all the things that are being discussed here, you know, what comes to mind, talking about the different generations, and, you know, even the generation that I belong to, you know, from a management standpoint, I think there has to be a different way of managing. You know, I think this came to mind when we started talking about, you know, pumping out the work in 24 hours, you know, as opposed to 40 hours kind of thing, right? I think it comes down to being able to more manage by objectives, right? Yes, you know, or maybe even kind of alter the meaning of that. You know, I know I'm going to get this value out of this service that you're going to give me. I don't care how long it takes you to do it. You know,
goal orientation.
Right. Yep. As long as you bring me back, you know, that result. Yeah. You know,
and that's the basis of value selling, right? And that I think that's a great point. I just wanted to circle back to what Brandon had said earlier about macro and micro, because I don't think we addressed the micro side of it as much as I was thinking about anyway. And that is from the standpoint of the 800,000 people in North Carolina right now that are out of work, right? And you think about their position, they're waiting on a paycheck from unemployment that they can't even reach those people on the phone. I mean, they're in a dire situation. And you think about what would it benefit them to have another stream of revenue. And you know, I worked for some Swiss folk back a couple of decades ago in Siebergeigen. The thing that most impressed me about the Swiss is they are masters of diversification. They know they don't put all their eggs in one basket, and they know when one thing goes down, the other ones are sustaining it. And so I just think to Ron's point earlier about what would it look like if we already were in the gig economy? Well, I'd probably have multiple streams of revenue, which I do. I might have one that's going up, which I do, and another that's going down, which I do, right? So I'm living that reality right now, right? So we need to think about things in those terms and say, how can I diversify and create multiple streams of revenue for my personal life and from my professional life that allows me to get to where I need to go? And I know Jordan was talking about doing it out of a survival mode, but let's think about it and take a paradigm shift and say, let's do it from a thriving mode. Let's grow, to Dexter's point, in a way that's different, that's organic, that allows me to use my 40 or 60 hours a week. Most of us are working 60 hours a week if you're in a corporate gig, right? And turn that 60 hours a week into 120 hours worth of revenue. That's, by the way, one of my mentees shared a book with me called The 4-Hour Work Week. And he's talking about getting other people to he outsourced his own work that people pay him for. And I was just like, How brilliant is that? So going back to where the millennials are thinking differently, I've just thought like, wow, that would never have occurred to me, right? But great book, 4-Hour Workweek.
Whereas to me, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense when you look at it.
And that contributes to the gig economy. Big time.
Exactly. Somebody that's out there that makes less than you, right? And you think about this, it just makes total sense. People do it in having people come in and clean their house or whatever, or mow your lawn or whatever, right? They're making less than you, but they're happy to get that income that you're providing for them to come in and cut your grass twice a week or whatever, right? And so we got to think about all the other work that fits into that realm, right? Somebody's making a lot more than you, and they might be able to farm out a little bit of their work to you, and all of a sudden you got synergy. So just a thought.
Okay, so in closing, I just want to say this was a really great conversation.
Yeah.
Great conversation. I really appreciate the different perspectives, around what work's going to look like tomorrow. Because certainly from an RTriad perspective, I think we're right in the mix in terms of preparing others and being able to help others get ready for the gig economy and or, to work differently remotely. So, Patricia Brooker signing off, or actually turning it over to my colleague Clyde, I believe.
Thank you guys for letting me be a part of just a conversation about the gig economy and what it's going to look like. Two words that I take away is kind of things that I talked about earlier, and it's really around how can I start to harness what the millennials or Gen Z brings to the table, because that is our workforce of now, right? And how do I start to now leverage the technology to drive organizations where I'm working with people, processes, and technology to move to the next level.
Brandon Harrison here. Great initial conversation about the gig economy, looking to continue it more. As Kevin had mentioned, we're focusing on the micro aspect. There is definitely will need to be a shift in the mindset of people across all generations to get them to be able to take advantage of the gig economy and to not get left behind. Corporations will figure out how to best benefit on their side, so we have to make sure that the people don't get left behind and can benefit as well.
Jordan Robinson here, and one of the biggest things that I took away from this conversation, and I feel like has a huge head start, is knowing your audience. So as we talk about the gig economy, to understand knowing your audience from a business standpoint, from an employee standpoint, from a talent standpoint, from an industry standpoint, and to tie in from both Dexter and Patricia about even with between being in the sustainable mindset and the growth mindset. And I think it's important to understand where people are coming from and what their mentality is, because that's going to inform which one of the two and how to strategize. So thank you all for hosting it, and I thank you for letting me be a part of it.
There's so many thoughts going around. This has been such a very stimulating conversation, and I'd like to say thanks for, allowing me to be in this room where I'm not necessarily the smartest one, and that's good, right? That's a good thing. It brought up a lot of good points, a lot of points for further conversation, for further thought. And, just in general, I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. It's about, putting all the different ideas on the table so they can be discussed. I think it's been very good. Thank you for allowing me to join you.
Thanks for everybody for joining the call today and having a potent discussion on the gig economy and the future of work in our first episode of the Future of Work online series. Round of applause for you all. We really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your knowledge and your experiences throughout this time. And we know this is an ongoing conversation. It's a great start to our next episode in the Future of Work series. For those of you watching, check us all out below on our social media platforms to continue to engage in the conversation, and we'll see you on episode 2.